The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is a bold action plan adopted in 2015 by all member states of the United Nations, encompassing the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, further broken down into 169 targets to be met by 2030. And Jade, I'm going to start with you, and particularly your response to this theme of the journey to 50-50 by 2030 and what it means in your role as an HR director at one of the largest corporations and organizations in the world.
Afternoon, Vuyo. Firstly, thank you for having me to be part of this conversation today. It's definitely an inspiring agenda for us to all get behind, and really it is one that's very close to my heart. So I think maybe, Vuyo, in answering your question, I'd really love to start with sharing a bit around my purpose, and sharing the link between the role that I do and this important journey of 50-50 by 2030. I think my purpose is deeply anchored in being a voice to the voiceless. And I think I'm very fortunate that in working in a global organization, which is purpose-led like Unilever, I have the opportunity to bring to life that purpose in the work I do every single day. Really, if I think about the role that I do, it is definitely one that is one that works with global leaders, it works with local teams in the market, and we're really working towards this audacious ambition of pioneering and leading the way on equity, diversity, and inclusion. I think it's one that's deeply anchored, in our business strategy and the way that we do business, and we see it as interlinked so that we can really make a difference to drive innovation and business performance. But it's really one that we also want to use to touch societies, to touch our consumers. Now, if I think about journey to 50-50 by 2030, it's a journey that we've been on as Unilever for many years now. Of course, we look at gender equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as many other intersectionalities, being LGBTQIA+, race, disability, etc. But I think this journey of gender transformation is one we've been on for many years, like I mentioned, and I'm very proud to share that we've actually been gender balanced at management in Southern Africa since 2017 and in Africa since mid-2020. I think critical to what you've mentioned is it's not just about representation across the organization, but it's around what does your representation look like at the most senior levels. And I think for us, this is really a big achievement in terms of the journey we've been on. I think what's really important, though, is that it's not about the representation only, right? It is really about how do we actually create that sense of inclusion, that sense of belonging. And so that's really very much where our focus is at the moment, and how we actually tackling those systemic barriers and inequities that will achieve that.
And I think we'll definitely get into why it's not just about the numbers, because we can critique that we won't get to 50-50 by 2030, but what are the mechanisms that we're going to put in place in order to drive this purpose-led innovation and this purpose-led resilience? And speaking of which, Shanaz, the very same question to you, in that as you think about the journey to 50-50 by 2030 and the resilience term and there's resilience in your role and how it engages in strengthening gender justice.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very, very much for having me. This is very exciting to be part of this discussion. So I think I'm going to start off I want to first clarify something. There's because I think with COVID and lockdown, we've all been using the term resilience quite a lot. And so I think for listeners out there, I think it's important to understand the distinction between urban resilience, which is the department I work in at the City of Cape Town, and then resilience as personal resilience, where I think all of us have had to tap in quite deep and dig in and find that kind of inner strength in the last while. Urban resilience, on the other hand, it kind of has its basis in the environmental sciences, where people looked at how after a drought, after some kind of severe, storm, something like that, a natural system was able to bounce back. And more than bounce back, how was it able to thrive? And so we're trying to apply that to kind of social systems. And so, it's looking at trying to understand the systems, the systemic issues. I think what Jade kind of probably knows a lot more about in her area, looking at adaptive leadership, and just trying to thinking about a more forward-looking approach that makes our systems more adaptive, understanding those interconnections. And within that space, something that I'm deeply passionate about is women's roles and women's voices in that. We live in a very complex country. I think at times it really challenges us, when you're like trying to be South African in itself, sometimes I think can be quite challenging. But we live in this incredible place with so much potential and so many amazing people. So in my day job, I'm with the City of Cape Town, but I have this passion project called 1001 South African Stories. And I've been running this passion project for about 5 years now. And I pretty much curate and gather South African stories. So once a month, I chat to people and I ask them, what is your experience of being South African like? And that process for me is often incredibly inspiring. I come sometimes, I log on and I'm like, oh my God, it's like 5 o'clock, or I've just had the longest day. Do I really want to do this? And then I talk to these people and I'm just like, wow, we live in this place with so much energy. It's just a question of harnessing that. But to come back to the question of women and women's empowerment and the importance of women, we have a long road to travel. I don't have any kind of rose-tinted glasses about the position or situation of women in our country. I think the three of us speaking right now come from certain backgrounds, may experience certain privilege, but how does that filter down to the majority of women in our country? And that's important, not just because it's glossy and beautiful and, you can make different arguments, but because women are, in essence, very much the leaders in a very real daily sense. Most children live with their mothers or some kind of female caregiver. We have in our country I stand to be corrected on this, but one of the lowest rates of both parents being registered on a child's birth certificate, which means that it's generally a mother, which means that it is generally a female caregiver that has to interact with the state to provide services and take care of that child.
HR is usually seen as the partner to the company. And for graduates who are beginning their career journey, or young women who are starting, older women who are re-entering the workforce, what critique would you offer to them that they analyze before joining a workforce, if in fact they do care about gender transformation and human capital development?
Thank you, Vuyo. I think you're taking me back to 10 years ago at the start of my career journey, and some of the things that, I was really considering starting out in my career. I think what we know now more than ever before, for both women and men in society today, is that when you are considering a prospective employer, it's not just the hygiene factors that matter at this point in time. I think everyone is really looking for an opportunity to use their voice, to really reimagine societies, to really make a difference, to uphold human rights, to drive gender equity as one area and one intersectionality of transformation that's required. But I think everyone really wants to be part of an organization that isn't going to leave anyone behind. And so in considering that and looking at that when you are considering a prospective employer, one of the things that I've found is that you'll see an organization where what they say, the commitment that they put out, and what they do, the deliberate actions that they take in how they do business, how they operate, will be so deeply intertwined, and you'll be able to see that synergy quite immediately in terms of how they do business. And really, I think when you look at organizations like Unilever, for example, where they see sustainable business as a way of driving business performance, you will immediately see that. And a couple of examples that I'd like to just share, is if we think about Unilever and the way we use our brands as a force for doing good in society, I'll talk about a local brand that's just come to mind as Shanaz mentioned. A couple of examples around domestic violence, for example, is Joko. Joko is a much-loved local tea brand in South Africa, and I think one of the examples of a collaboration we've recently had in using our brands with purpose as a force for good is the collaboration with people opposing women abuse, but really end domestic violence, which is such a topical, critical point for us to bring visibility to in society today. And that's just really one example, that you can look at to see how a business actually says what is important and does what is important, and that synergy between the two. And so really my encouragement to those starting off their career or re-entry into the career world is to say, look for those synergies, because it will be very easy to see that what you say and what you do are linked together in the area of transformation and putting people first.
This comes to my next question to you, Jade, in that what is it that Unilever is doing or beginning to or continuing to think about how they remodel and recalibrate their approach to gender strategies, to human development, and to ensure that women are kept visible and are at the forefront and participating at work? Because human capital is really at the center of recovery, of rebuilding South Africa, of rebuilding societies. And as you mentioned about how do we reimagine the society that we want to see. And if you can perhaps share one or two practices that Unilever has employed to ensure that the gender washing does not exist, but also throughout this journey that we try and get to perhaps over the 50-50.
Thanks, Vuyo. I think, I love this question, because if we really think about the why of what we do, it isn't about just having the right representation. It's really about how do we actually use that diverse representation to lead for equality, for equity, that Shanaz has also mentioned in her examples. But really in the work context, it's about how that spirit of diversity will really unlock inclusion, innovation. It will allow us to serve our consumers better, for example, but really make a bigger impact to society ultimately at the end of the day. And so really, I think for us, Vuyo, like I mentioned, having achieved gender balance a couple of years ago in Southern Africa, last year in Africa, I think for us, we really are starting to shift our focus away from just, like I said, checking and monitoring and making sure the representation is there, which is absolutely critical in terms of the agenda and where we need to get to, but it's not the end state, like you've mentioned. And so for us, really, the big focus is how do we actually move some of those systemic barriers and unblock these barriers for women. That is really about how do we actually look at some of our policies, our practices, to make sure that we're eliminating bias so that we can actually feel that full value of the diverse representation that we have. And maybe just to share one or two examples with you, Vuyo, I think very much where our thinking is around how do we embed the right behaviors that will really lead to sustained momentum on this agenda. And so critical is the role of allyship. And I think for many of us, we'll see that that's critical on this journey to 50-50 and beyond. And so one of the things we've done is we've expanded on the principle of employee resource groups, which I think is not uncommon for many organizations. And so we have something called the Women's Interactive Network, which has been in place for many years now. But what we've done is we've taken that a step further just over a year ago, where we've introduced an affiliate pillar called Men as Allies. And I think really what is critical about Men as Allies is saying, how do we use those who come from a position of privilege in this case? How do we invite them in to use their voice, their influence to create the right opportunities, to create the platform, to give rise to what needs to be said when we are talking about removing the systemic barriers and eliminating bias. And so that's been a very deliberate action we've taken in the business to bring everyone along on this journey for sustained momentum.
Now, Shanaz, as we realize why the underinvestment in women's economic empowerment must be turned around, let's come to this level of strategic thinking that Unilever is also applying, and that is, how do we bring influence to governments across the country, across the continent, as partnerships, political will, public participation really sits at the center of how we think about rebuilding, and especially because the scale does not fare well for women, as you've alluded earlier.
I wish I had answers, easy answers. Recently, I think it's not too long ago, South Africa committed to generation equality. We've made a bold kind of commitment. I really hope we come through with it. A lot of the time we have wonderful plans, but we don't actually have the resources to go with it. And I think that's where the idea of partnerships becomes really, really important. It may be that this is something that we can do, or this is a commitment the government has made, but can we get civil society actors, business, and other stakeholders to really come to the party and help, make this happen? And I think that's kind of an important thing, is I really think with this issue around gender empowerment, gender equality, violence against women, leadership, all of these things, we really need a whole of society approach, because it really is planning for the future. We haven't really touched on the impact of climate change in our discussion yet, because that could take us in a whole that probably could take another whole couple of hours or weeks to discuss. But that's also something that's really important, is how is climate change going to impact on some of our resources, on our relationships? So that's why I think, we really need a whole of society approach when we discuss women's empowerment and leadership. The second thing I'd say is that for a number of organizations, it's not, and Jade also mentioned this, and you mentioned this, it's not just about the numbers, but it's about the culture of the organization and about allowing women's voices to actually be heard. I know when I was much younger and I had, came into leadership positions, because you're kind of feeling your way around and you're trying to copy people, you don't really advocate for yourself, nor do you really advocate for women. Sometimes you can quite honestly advocate against your own best interests. And I think that's really important then within a culture of an organization. Are you allowing people to advocate for themselves and to bring about change? Because we can't keep doing the things that we've always done. You can do things like mentorship programs, intergenerational dialogues. You can do all of these things because you really do need to think about new ways of kind of approaching things. But to also have very authentic women leadership, where women can actually go, actually as a woman, I don't actually need, because I've really struggled to this point and I've been balancing these things, I don't need to make it harder for other women. I need to make it a lot easier for other women. Can we have a conversation about like endometriosis or period pain and all of these things that we don't really talk about because they're kind of uncomfortable in these organizational settings? But I think when we get to those points, that's when I think we've really experienced kind of a big kind of change at an organizational level, and I would hope at a societal level, so that we can have what we really need, and that is, I think, a society where people as individuals can bring their whole selves and can really have the opportunity to thrive and flourish.
As we wrap up this conversation, we have about 3 minutes remaining. And my question to you is, what is your message to the fatigued women, the young girls who are tuned in and need to be encouraged because they are blanketed with lack of opportunity, self-belief, the discrimination that really faces them as they journey to 50-50 in South Africa and across the continent? Jade, I'll start with you and then I'll hand over the mic to Shanaz.
Thanks, Vuyo. I think, I'd really start with firstly acknowledging really what we are facing, because I think fundamentally we all want to feel seen, we want to feel heard. And I think very often on these kinds of topics, we sometimes do want to shy away from the reality that exists, that we do still have a long way to go on this journey. So I'd first start by acknowledging that. But I think really something that's helped me, I started with my purpose when we opened up this conversation today. And I think my purpose has really anchored me along this journey, and we're not at the end point. We've still got a long way to go. And so I really lean into my purpose of being a voice to the voiceless to help me carry that resilience, different to what Shanaz mentioned earlier in terms of resilience, but really to keep that resilience on this journey, because it is going to require deliberate action from all of us. Yes, notwithstanding the role of allyship on this journey, but for those fatigued women, for those young women starting along this journey, I would really just say, as we go along, there are going to be some difficult moments, and it is about how can we turn those difficult moments into a crucible moment that can really affect positive change along the way.
So, Vuyo, I'm a student of law, so I'm going to say to everyone that could be listening to this, I think it's really important for us to honestly and wholeheartedly believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. All of us have a place here. All of us have a chance to participate here and build something. And very importantly, whatever we do, we're building for each other and we're building together. And I really, that kind of motivates me in kind of my work, is that what we're doing is for each other and for a better, prosperous tomorrow.
A huge thank you to my panelist, Jade Wright, the HR Director for Finance, UniOps and Equity and Diversity and Inclusion for Africa at Unilever, and Shanaz Kasim-Musa, the Senior Resilience Analyst at the City of Cape Town. A fantastic way to wrap up this conversation. And with that, I hand over back to Leanne.
you.